to be in a building that's been soaked in prayer, but more importantly, with a people who've been absolutely drenched in prayer this week. It really makes a difference. I'm Simon, for those of you who don't know me, and that's all I'm going to tell you about me, which is a little bit odd because we're in the middle of a series on identities. You'd think that I'd be wanting to talk about that. We're going through the first half of the book of Ephesians, Paul's letter to the Ephesian church, in which he really discusses what our identity is in Christ. It's entitled, "This Is Us." And I really want that to soak in. So I'm going to be really awkward. And I'm going to ask you first just to turn to somebody next to you, in front of you, behind you, and tell them that they are a child of God, please. Now, if you're anything like me at all, you concentrated on the words you were saying, and you probably didn't concentrate on hearing what was being said to you. So I'm going to try my second one out of 3. This time I'm going to ask you to tell the person near you that they are redeemed and forgiven, but I want you to really listen and accept that truth being spoken into you as well. Tell them and listen that they are redeemed and forgiven. So last week, Naomi was preaching this series, and one of the things, if you haven't heard that, do catch that up on YouTube link on the church website on Connect. It was fantastic. One of the bits that really resonated with me was Naomi saying that someone finally managed to break through and convince her that she's repeating, or in the past she has repeated, the lies of the world. Things that the devil wants us to believe of ourselves. I'm not good enough. I keep getting it wrong. I'm never going to change. God couldn't love me. And instead, she spent time saying truths about herself, biblical truths, God's promises, things about her identity. And it really made a difference. Many years ago, I did that for the first time. And it didn't feel comfortable for an English guy, I've got to be honest, but it was good. So try this one on for size. Say this to yourself, not to the person next to you. Say this one to yourself, because this is what today's passage is. I am God's masterpiece. That was louder than I expected. I was expecting people to be a bit like, oh, am I allowed to say that? That feels boastful. My prayer was going to be that by the end of me talking, you and I would both be happier saying that and realizing it's not boasting in ourselves, it's boasting about God. That's hopefully where we're going to get to, and fantastic if you're in that place of freedom already. I'm going to have a look today at Ephesians chapter 2. We're looking specifically at just 3 verses 8 to 10, but because that's so short, and because actually this passage builds on what came before last week, I'm actually going to reread out the 4 verses from last week first, and then go straight on into the new material. Okay, so we're starting off with Ephesians 2, verse 4. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespass, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. And then moving on to this week's passage. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship. Some translations, we are his masterpiece. Created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. I'm going to be looking today at the two separate halves of that. First of all, we're going to concentrate on, and this is really what last week was about, but this is what verse 8 is saying. We're going to look at the fact that we are saved, but not by works. And in the second half, we're going to look at something very much linked to it, that we can get ourselves in a muddle about, we can get tangled up. We're going to look at the fact that although we are not saved because of good works, we are saved so that we will then do good works. Our response is good works. So focusing in the first bit, just to be really clear about this, we are saved. If we've, as Jade said, if we've said yes to God, if we've accepted what he's already done for us, we are saved. We are saved by grace. We are saved by grace through faith. We're saved by grace through faith rather than by any works we could ever do. It's nothing to do with our good works. And we see hints of that from the very, very first chapter of Ephesians, but also in the first slide that came up. We are described as, before Christ, we are dead. We are dead. We are spiritually dead, but I just want to be very clear. It talks about the heavenlies and things like that, and this has been gone into the last few weeks. That is the fundamental reality. It's not that we're walking around physically alive and in some smaller way that doesn't matter so much we're spiritually dead. It's the other way round. This is a temporary, transient physical world. There's an everlasting reality which is far more important, and that's the reality in which we were dead in our sin. We were also described, in other parts of the Bible, it describes the same thing as us being in slavery. Sometimes in slavery to sin, we can't help, we try not to sin, but we do anyway. We just can't stop it. We can't live the way we want to. We are slaves to sin. Sometimes it describes us as almost bankrupt, sold into slavery. We can't possibly afford the price we'd need to pay to escape. We are bankrupt. And John Stott, I won't try to say his title in case it goes wrong like last week, but John Stott has this to say. I quote from him a couple of times today. So far in Ephesians, Paul has described salvation in terms of a resurrection from the dead, a liberation from slavery, and a rescue from condemnation. And each of those declares that the work is God's. For dead people cannot bring themselves to life again, nor can captive and condemned people free themselves. Our salvation is not by our works, it's all from God. And in the passage we saw some wonderful words. Reading them out in the order they appeared, it describes this happening because of mercy, because of love, because of his great love with which he loved us, to really emphasize it, because of grace, because of kindness. All words from these few short verses. It's happening because of God and his character and his grace, his love. I do want to focus in just briefly on grace. You've probably heard it explained before in a better way what it means. When you don't have it, you're a disgrace. But more seriously, you can get barred from premises. You can even get barred from an entire country. If you're an ambassador who's done something wrong, whose country's fallen out of favor, you're described as persona non grata. In theory, at the end of a meal, You get to decide in the restaurant whether the service has been fantastic or not. And in theory, you get to decide, and it's your choice. You don't have to. You just freely decide to leave a little bit extra, a gratuity, a tip, but coming from the word grace. A musician may play the basic tune, and everyone will recognize it, or they might add some extra notes to make it sound better, grace notes. When a US president comes to the end of their term, famously, they pardon some people who are incarcerated. They're doing time. They are locked up because they have been found guilty, and they get let off the hook by what's technically known as an act of grace. It's undeserved. When you subscribe to something, maybe for 12 months, sometimes you get the first month free. Used to be you got 3 months free and then paid for 12 months. Back in the old days when the magazine came through the letterbox and hit the carpet in your hallway, those first 3 editions which were free, the first 3 issues, were called grace issues. Grace means it's completely undeserved. We cannot earn it. We don't deserve it. It's given to us by God anyway. It's the undeserved, loving commitment of God to us that we're talking about. There are many mistakes we can make with grace. The one I'm going to highlight today is the fact that we can go too far in one of 2 directions. On the one hand, we can really do something which sounds so silly, but we all have done it. We think about something which is undeserved, and we think, but I don't deserve this. And seriously, we say things like, but you don't know what I've done. I keep getting it wrong. God can't keep on doing this. And that ignores the fact that it is completely undeserved, that God knew that better than we did. He knew all of it before the creation of the world. And you know what? If you're sat there thinking, this grace, it might be good enough for some people, it's not big enough for the things I've done, God knows how big it is, because its weight hung with him on the cross. He's already dealt with every single bit of it. He knows. He really knows what it cost, more than you. And his grace is enough. I've really enjoyed in the last fortnight getting back into the Lectio 365 devotional app. Every time I go back onto it, I think, why did I stop listening to this? It's such a good habit. Again, 2 quotes coming out this week from it, but the first one is really simple, but it took my breath away. There is always more grace in God than sin in me. There is always more grace in God than sin in me. The other extreme we can go to is being annoyed that it's undeserved grace. Because I don't know about you, I like to earn things. I like people saying, well done, when I get something right. And grace doesn't let us do that. And therefore, we don't like it. And we want to add in works. We want to earn a bit of it. We want to be a bit better than the person down there who didn't get it. We want it to be because of us. Phil Moore's got some really nice, but also blunt words about this one that in his devotional on Ephesians comes up. Gaze at this passage, this portrait of your salvation. You contributed nothing but your sin. Full stop. You can rest in the fact that it is utterly completed in Jesus. Paul was never more saved than you. There has never been anyone in church history more saved than you. There is no room in the portrait for our boasting. It just shows his amazing grace. And I've mentioned already that when we get to the second half of this and we look at we are his workmanship, that can be translated masterpiece. Either way, it's about creation. God made you. And if you've accepted his forgiveness, he has remade you. He's turned you into a new creation. And that has a consequence. Going back to that first John Stott quote, dead people cannot bring themselves back to life again, nor can captive or condemned people free themselves. But now he puts the matter beyond even the slightest shadow of a doubt. Salvation is creation, recreation, new creation. And creation language is nonsense unless the Creator is wholly responsible. None of it comes from us. In closing this first half, I just want to reflect on the language, and this has been brought up in previous preachers' talks in this series, about us being in Christ. Came up 4 times in those few verses, and I think it's relevant to today. In one of the commentaries on Ephesians, the question is posed, how can it be possibly true that what happened to Christ in the past tense happened to us at the same time? We weren't even born then. And we are now separated from him by 2,000 years, culture, geography, race, and every conceivable reality. Both Jesus and we're individuals. Doesn't that stop us being involved in actions which happened to him? And Galatians 2, verse 20, I think answers that fairly quickly. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Just repeating what other people have said, in Christ means we are fully identified with him. We've participated in all of the events of his life in a very real spiritual sense. What is true of him is also completely true of us. Christ's past is our past. He died, we died. He has risen, we have risen as well. And he controls our present and our future. In summary, we do nothing to gain our salvation and life with God. But this joining to God does everything for us. We're going to move on to looking from the fact that we have been saved by the free gift of God to the fact that there will be a response to that. And the order is really, really important. I've racked my brains trying to think of times people have explained this. And apologies if someone in this room has explained it really well and I've forgotten. But from books, from online stuff, I can't remember anyone coming up with a good analogy for this, which probably means one's not possible, and the one I'm about to give is confusing, but I'm going to try. Over the next week, my daughter Esther, who's in year 6, and lots of people around the country are going to be dealing with the same thing, she's going to be told what school she is going to next year. She's going to find out. Her grandparents are really excited. I get messages every day asking, does she know yet? They could look at my previous response, which says what date she'll find out on, but they don't seem to. They want to know, have I bought her uniform yet? No, because I don't know what school yet. But uniform, for me, is a badge of identity. And I think we could make 2 mistakes with uniform and schools. You see, I could ignore what the council say about where there's a school place for my daughter. I could just go and buy the uniform of the school that her grandparents really want her to go to. That wouldn't make her part of that school. It wouldn't actually be part of her identity. She wouldn't actually belong there. I could send her in that uniform, which you can just buy down the high street, on the 1st of September. And depending on how secure the school is, she might get in through the front gate because she's wearing the uniform that looks right. But the second they do the register, which is checking your identity, someone is getting in touch with me to have some stern words with me, and she's not staying there. It's not going to happen. Just buying the uniform doesn't make you a member of the school. Doing good works does not get us salvation. But you know what? If I get a message this week, and I tell the grandparents that she's going to a certain school, and on the 1st of September, I message them and say, dropped her off, it's all going fantastic, she was so happy. That evening, I message them saying she had a great day, she came out happy. Over the next few days, I keep on messaging them, saying that she's enjoying the lesson, she knows where to go to, she's not intimidated. And then the first day, they're meant to pick her up from school or come to our house afterwards and see her. She's wearing a different uniform for a different school, then they're going to realize something is up. Okay? Buying the uniform doesn't make her part of a school, but if a few weeks after she started at a school, or I tell people she started at a school, she doesn't own the uniform still, people are going to think, this doesn't sound quite right. You see, having a uniform to wear it doesn't get you into a school, but it is an inevitable, unescapable consequence of taking a place there and getting the child to attend. You can't not have the uniform if you're going to the school. You might get it a couple of days late and have a bit of a telling off, and someone might help you get it and take you down the shop, give you vouchers to help with it, but it's got to happen. You can't get away from it for 5 years. It doesn't take place. In a similar way, good works, do not get us saved. They don't contribute at all to our salvation. But if no one can see them, something's wrong. And it doesn't feel like it's true. The order is really important. And the other thing I want to just say before we dig in a bit is just about the fact that actually all of this is talking not just, again, about the present and this earthly life. It's talking about the fact that we're being saved for eternity. And I want you to really think about these good works in the context of being prepared for eternity. Again, from the Lectio app, a missionary about 1,500 years ago, Columbanus, I think is his name, said this: "What are you, human life? You are the road to life, not life itself. You are to be traversed, but not inhabited. For no one dwells on a road, you just travel down it." Our response, the good works that have to be inevitable if we're saved, they're a preparation for something greater. Paul talks about the fact that any of our troubles, any of our pain, any of our difficulties, they are fleeting and momentary compared to eternity. The difficulty of doing good works, the fact that we might have to make sacrifices to do them, only fleeting compared to what it means in eternal terms. So as we zoom in to this idea that we are saved to do good works, like I said, people do get it mixed up. This almost sounds heretical. Good works are indispensable to salvation. Is that okay? Can you say that? Again, John Stott did, and he's fairly solid. The word too is important because it goes on. Good works are indispensable to salvation, not as its grounds or its means, but as its consequence and its evidence. You can say that. That is biblical. That is what this passage here is telling us. So much so that actually the words that we get translated as disobedience and unbelief in the New Testament, a lot of the time, they are the same Greek word. They're used interchangeably in translations because they've got such a strong link. Disobedience and unbelief. This faith and your actions are strongly, strongly linked in this way. You only know that something's authentic when you see that evidence. I do like to quote people. I'm going to quote Steve from a couple of weeks ago because he says exactly this, and I think it's worth going back to. This is evidence that can be seen because it changes us. It transforms us. People will notice the difference if you're saved. The fruit of the Spirit is visible evidence. It's that proof of authenticity. Notice in the passage, if we can get up the final slide from the passage again, that would be great. It uses a word along the line of work or works 3 times, and there's another one implicit in there. Okay, first of all, we're told we are not saved because of our works. But it goes on to suggest we're not in control of our works because, number one, we're the workmanship of God. He has done the work making us, creating us, recreating us, making us new creations. He's then prepared us to walk in these good works. The preparation was him working on it. Okay, he's done the work there. He's done the preparation. He's in control. Even of the works we're meant to do, he's doing the work behind the scenes. He's in control of them. This is all prepared by God. And it's so that we can walk in these good works. And in other translations, the literal meaning is given, which is actually, it's our way of life. Good works should be our way of life. Good works will inevitably become our way of life if we are saved. Why is it happening? Because, again, we are in Christ. And if we share his identity, then we're going to be like him. And he came to earth as a servant. And we are called to serve. It's inescapable that we will end up serving if we are saved. It becomes increasingly difficult to say, I know I live in Christ, but I am going to do the opposite of what Christ expects. And because we're in Christ and other believers are in Christ, we are united to them in Christ. This we're going to go on to look at. Next week is going to come up repeatedly and keeps on coming up through the rest of the book of Ephesians. Christ has been described in chapter 1 as the head and us as the body. We're united to him in that. We're part of the same body. The head is part of the body. But we, plural, are part of that. And therefore, the people we're doing good works to, yes, it's people out there in the world, but it is also very much people in the church. A lot of that service is going to happen here. In kind of an overview of Ephesians, you can look at it as chapters 1 to 3 talk about the change in us, the change from light to darkness, and then chapters 4 to 6 discuss the hard choices that this new order demands. There's a change in status coming up soon, from foreigners and aliens to fellow citizens. That unity of the body with other believers, fellow citizens, and those demand choices. One cannot become a new creation without acting like one. We get a foretaste of the second half of the book here as we're told that we are going to change, we are going to do good works, and that is being done in community. Because this instruction has been described as being relentlessly relational. It's not about us as individuals, it's about the people we are serving. We're going to look next week at the fact that the wall of hostility between groups of people is knocked down by Christ's work on the cross. This week we're looking at the fact that we're called to serve them, to do good works. We've come to God, bound to Christ, but therefore also bound to all other believers. Faith in Christ leads unavoidably to love, demonstrated active love, actions based on love for the others that God has set apart in himself. And I do just want to also point out this is happening because it's for his glory. And this has been touched on as well. This works because we're forgiven. This works because we are weak. God chooses us in our weakness to do these good works. And Paul elsewhere describes us as being like jars of clay. We're carrying around this bright light, this good news, this amazing love, and he uses our weak vessels, our imperfections, the fact that we needed to be forgiven so much, and that gives him even more glory. I won't quote you this time, but Steve described this in terms of house renovation shows, and the idea that the more derelict the property, the more glorious, the more surprising it is when the transformation takes place and it looks lovely at the end. And that is what God is doing here. We were dead. We were slaves to sin. We were bankrupt. And because of his amazing grace, he turns all of that round. Not because of anything we've done, not because we've earned it. He turns it all around, and then he uses us to do these good works that he has prepared for us. He's chosen us to do. How much glory does he get by doing it even with us? When I originally sat down to start getting stuff onto paper, I thought I knew what I was going to be saying, and it was very different to this. I might ask for the band to come back up just as I finish, because I thought I was going to spend 10 minutes talking about the Bible and the rest of the time talking about the application. And it just didn't work out at all like that, and there were a couple of times where I thought I was going to find something and the door just seemed to be closed. And then I got reminded that it's the Family Matters meeting. And if you're part of the church or plan to be part of the church, please do be there as we hear about all the ministries in the church, because it's not just the welcome team. It's not just Neville and Sam coming up and saying we need help. I'm not sure there's a rota in the church that wouldn't like more people on it. Yes. And I will just point out that the rotas are important. They genuinely are. Some of the stuff that happens without it being rotated is equally important. The support and the love, the being stuck into midweek groups and being part of community and loving each other through that is also important. And going out into the world and showing our love and doing those actions there is also important. But the application, I think, for a lot of us, probably is thinking, is there something else that God has prepared for me to do? These aren't just jobs that need doing and someone has to do it. God chose someone to do it. Was it you? Was it you?